Having a fantastic start to your week. Happy Tuesday, almost through the first month of 2021. Hopefully your 2021 is treating you better than your 2020. At least it's trending in that direction, as they say. Try to get this whole thing set up over here. Hang on a minute. What's going on? Something's messed up here. Maybe if I do this. There we go. All right. Hang on. All right, that's better. That looking a whole lot better. All right, so hope everybody's having a great night. I know I am. Just got through playing around with Miss Nasty, the mistress. Basically, I could say, oh, I was playing around tuning it. Well, technically, I did tune it, and it's funny because it falls in line with the topic of tonight's chat. So Brian, can't remember your last name. This chat, I guess, is for you. I used to do those videos where I go, this video is for you, when somebody would request it. But in this case, it's a chat that's heading straight for you. So in perfect Kismet style timing, this is what happened. So y'all know that I've been running that 170 degree thermostat now for a while. And finally, and I never did make any accommodations for it in the tune, which is basically to say that I never killed the P0, 128 or 125 codes, basically because I wanted to see how long it would last or how long it would take before it actually did throw the codes. And weirdly enough, it took a lot longer than I thought. Typically, the 128 code will pop up at about the 5 or 6 key cycle of the car once it starts seeing the fact that it's got such a low thermostat. Well, this one took a lot longer than that. Finally, it did throw the 128, so I had to make some changes real quick in the DTCs, and so I just decided to go out and play around with the car because, wouldn't you? So anyway, it got me well, I had already wanted to do this video because Brian had mentioned that I hadn't ever talked about cooling system modifications. And, when the questions come up, I'll answer them, but I've never done the intro. I've never done the monologue specifically for the cooling system mods. So I'm going to say what's up to everybody, and then I'm going to start yammering on, and y'all can go back and forth on y'all's side. Let's see. Slash is in saying, what's up? Got the arm flex. I like it. George R. saying, hi, everybody. Demonology saying, sup, B? What's up, Demonology? I like it. Boosted Himmy saying, hi from North Carolina. Hello. Dr. Div saying, what's going on? I like it. What's up, Doc? John Jones saying, good evening, brother. Hope all is well. All is well, my friend. CFLJ's got the 2 thumbs up and the 2 guns. I like that a lot. Chris Egger saying, what up, B? Got the flexes. About to blow my arm out over here. Marco Corleone got the flex. I like it. Saying, what's going on, Professor? I like it. Ruben saying, what is happening? And Anthony G saying, good evening. I like it. Thanks. I like the bald guy with the shades. Absolutely love it. So here's the thing, guys. Let's talk about cooling system mods. What works? What doesn't? What have I seen do well at the track? What have I seen do well at the dyno? What works in what environments, and what is a complete and total waste of time? Now, this is going to be a little bit longer monologue, I'm sure, than I typically will have. So if I end up not being able to get to you at some point, apologies in advance. But this is a topic that's got a lot of legs, so let's dive right into it. First thing that always comes up is thermostat. What thermostat are you running? And the default thermostat that most guys will use will be a 180 degree thermostat. Full stop on this. Name brand really doesn't matter. I've gone to my local O'Reilly's, which is right down the street, asked for a 180 degree thermostat, took thermostat, stuck it in the car, and never had a problem ever again. And that is normally the trend. Going out and spending crazy money on a thermostat is stupid. So that's what I did with this one. I'm running a Reich 170 degree thermostat. You might go, well, what's the difference? It's just 10 degrees. Well, I'll put it to you like this. The 170 does run on average about 10 degrees cooler. And so far as I can tell, the difference in performance is relatively negligible. However, I can say that it is more consistent in terms of getting the car off the line. Basically, it just is a more consistent temperature all the way around for the most part. And of course, fan settings have a little bit to do with that, and we can get into that later. But let me go back to the 180 degree versus 170 thermostat. There's some 160s out there. The 160s and the 170s basically act about the same. So I'm just going to say 170 and 170 degrees is going to have to suffice for anything less than 180 degrees as far as a rating goes. The lowest thermostat that you can run without needing a tune for most of the Mopars out there is going to be a 180. I would say that 90-ish% of the Mopars that are out there you'll be able to get by with a 180 degree thermostat and not worry about throwing that annoying P0128 code. And the only way to get rid of it is to get rid of it in the tune. Now, for anybody that's going to try to run the 170, and again, 170 meaning 170 degrees or lower, it is going to trip the P0128 code. And the P0128 code basically is a code that the computer is showing that the car is just not getting up to a normal operating temperature. And in this case, you basically just kill the codes. This has nothing to do with fan settings or anything like that. And these are really not an emissions-based code. Just go ahead and kill it. So, in terms of power, anything like that, what have we seen on the dyno? Basically nothing. And the reason why we see nothing on the dyno, and this is real important, guys, so this is when it comes to this thermostat and how much power do you gain and all this other stuff, most of the time when you take your car to the dyno, if you've allowed it to cool off for any real amount of time, the car is going to get down to about 140 or 150 degrees. Most dyno operators won't make a hit until the car is at least 160 or 170 degrees, say around 165 degrees. That's typically where a car will lay down a good number on the dyno. Dyno operator goes, what? At 165 degrees, the thermostat's in the same position with either a 170, 180, or a 192, 195, on up to whatever size you want. They're all basically closed at that point. So they're all basically at the same temperature. They're going to make roughly the same power. Once you start dragging that number up, that's when you can start to see a little bit of a difference. But when I say a little bit, guys, I'm not talking about 10 or 12 horsepower. I'm talking maybe 5, 6, 3 horsepower. Depends on if it's an NA car, a 5.7 car, Hellcats. They're all going to be a little bit different. But the reality is that you're really not chipping away at a number when you're only messing around with 3, 4, or 5 horsepower increments. But it's still 3, 4, or 5 horsepower. So just know that. But again, that's allowing the car to get to a full operating temperature, which brings a host of other heat soak questions into play. Did it have more to do with the thermostat being higher with the car making lower power? Or is it just the fact that the thing is, 200 degrees sitting on the dyno? Think about that for a minute. Lots of heat, even though you've got the fans blowing over the thing, doesn't matter. You've got a hotter engine. Hotter engines just typically don't make as much power, but in this case, it's worth a little bit. So just know that going into the conversation that you're going to have with a thermostat question, it's really not going to be a seat of the pants thing, just maybe a little bit better consistency. And the car, it's going to make a little bit more power when it's cooler, get out of the hole a little bit quicker and run down the track a little bit better. All the while, and this is a big one, keeping the engine cool, which brings the knock down a little bit. In other words, the hotter the engine is, in general, the more sensitive it will be to fuel quality. The one thing that I've noticed at the drag strip, so now we're talking about drag strip experience, with the thermostat variants. Hellcats, perfect example of this. At 192 degrees of engine coolant temperature, leading up to about 194 degrees of engine coolant temperature, you will start to see where you normally wouldn't, you will start to see just a little bit of knock retard start to show its face. You guys with the trucks, those things run at 210 degrees. So they're already noisy as it is. Knock sensors are already a little sensitive, right? Maybe in that case, it'll help you a little bit. But I can tell you that above 192 to 194 degrees going down the drag strip, you will see knock retard start to creep in a little bit more. Now, is that a function of the temperature? Maybe, question mark. But what I will say is this, I've noticed it, and I've noticed it enough to call it consistent. So, haven't seen it on the dyno, but I have seen it at the drag strip. So do I recommend it? Gets a big B Mason check mark. Absolutely. 180 for you guys that don't have the ability to tune or don't have access to a tuner, or 170 if you do, and just make sure you kill that P0128 code. So that's going to get us done with the thermostat. And again, that's the number one question that I get, and that question spans all the way through, any naturally aspirated or supercharged application. Next is going to be, well, let's see, what should I do next? I'm gonna do intercoolers, ice tanks. I'll tell you what, let's do heat exchangers for you supercharged guys. I'm gonna talk specifically to you Hellcat guys real quick. This is a little bit frustrating. Okay, so one of the modifications for the Hellcat platform that you'll see will be a larger capacity heat exchanger. Basically, it's a radiator for the fluid that is cooling your inlet temperature for your supercharger, your discharge, I should say, for your supercharger. And the idea here is that it is dragging down that temperature because it has more capacity and it has just more ability to cool that fluid. Well, the thing is, so far as I can tell, that part has not played any part in making any Hellcat any faster or any safer, except if you're running in half-mile events. But if you're running in half-mile events, chances are, and you're being serious about it, chances are you're using an ice tank. But we'll get to that in a minute. So on the street, those temperatures really don't vary too much. And when you start dumping a ton of heat into that system, the stock system is fine if you are running that system only a quarter mile at a time, maybe even a half mile at a time. You could be able to get away with something, but even then, that system will eventually not be able to keep up with the thermal load that it's getting hit with. And you're going to start seeing those temperatures start to arc up. But again, it's going to take a while. I mean, I've seen half-mile cars. I mean, I take this thing out on the street, and I don't really see much variance. And of course, it's all stock. So if you're thinking about that mod, I would only suggest it if you were to be doing something like closed circuit racing. In that case, it might work. If you're going to go do the Silver State, in that case, it might work, where the vehicle is going to be under heavy load for a long period of time, and you need as much cooling capacity as you can get without running the AC, which can tear up your AC pump if you're running high RPM with it like that, because it just won't work once you go to a certain throttle position. And you're going to be carrying high load for a long period of time. That's where that system might help. But for you guys that are just playing around on the street, going to the drag strip, doing street hits, things like that, 60 to 130, 60 to 160, it's not going to help you in that respect. What will help you more in that respect is just keeping the engine itself cool. And again, we're going to go back to that thermostat at that point. So let me check in with you guys real quick, and then I'll get to other things like ice boxes and things like that. Anthony's saying, good evening. What's up, man? Chip is saying, what up, Mr. R&D? What's happening, man? Viage's checking in saying, what is happening? Chip's saying, hit that like. Yeah, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the share, hit the bell, all those. Just hit it. If you see it, just hit it. How about that? Story of my dating life. All right, Alberto is saying, what mods would help keep the 6.1 manifold cool at the drag strip other than 180-degree thermostat? A big old bag of ice. Go old school with that thing, man. That's about the only thing that's going to keep that thing cool. Used to do that with the 5.0s back in the day. Ruben's saying, I bought the F1 Stage 2 inner chiller. Very nice. It's unbelievable, especially in the summer, and does very well this winter. I'm running 180-degree thermostat myself, and I had to tune for that. Some guys do. And we're going to get to the inner chillers and things like that. I've got my own opinions on those. But Sovereign Knight saying, hey, Mason, lovely view of the Hellcat Challenger. Dodge Challenger is my choice of Mopar. There she is right there, staring right over my back, my left shoulder, the one that's not exploded right now. But I'm not going to be a little bitch about it because I'm still going to be in the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I will be practicing inflicting pain upon myself. D saying, I just put on the Philips Performance little double flares. It's like mini wide body. All right. Rift is checking in, saying, what's up, y'all? Sovereign Knight's checking back in. Let's see. Ship's asking, when changing the T-stat on a 2016 Challenger 392, can I just do a simple burp through the temp sensor, or do I need to take it to a shop, vacuum the system? Nobody takes these things to shops. In fact, nobody even burps it through the temperature sensor, although you can. They will actually basically kind of self-burp. So just make sure you keep your eye on that. You're going to want to overfill your tank by about an inch and a half or so. And then as it burps through, you'll just drop that coolant back in the tank to bring it back up. You can, though, burp it, and that's not going to hurt anything, but most guys don't. I didn't. Hey, Erie, Pennsylvania checking in. I like it. Car wash power brake. Thank you, sir. Riv saying, sup, Ruben? I like it. Ruben's checking in to D. Let's say 60 power saying, hello, B. Not sure if I asked you this already, but what's your opinion on HHP high horse performance as a Gen 3 Hemi tuner? Thanks in advance. Josh is awesome, man. Josh does a great job. If you're up near them, I'll tell you this, the guy's been doing that stuff for a long time, and they've got a lot of credit to their name. So I've talked to Josh. He's a good guy. And in fact, I've talked to him on several occasions. So absolutely would recommend if you're in the area. Eduardo saying, hey. Michael Wilcox saying, hey. Riv saying, I made a mess burping the cooling system on my cat. Yeah. My burping protocol for this one was just keep an eye on the reservoir. Modern Reds checking in saying, "Sup, B, got the arm flex." Michael Wilcox saying, "Milton, Delaware in the house. I like it." Yeah, Michael's saying he's 30 minutes away from HHP. Nice. Sovereign saying, "Hit that like." Rick is asking, is it worth keeping the new Trinity since he's on HP? Yeah, use it as a data logger, man. Absolutely, you can do that. A lot of guys, I used to use, in fact, I've still got one floating around somewhere, my old Trinity, just for quick data logging. Let's see. Val's saying he just got his car back from the dyno, wanted to push his E-Force to 8 pounds. He wouldn't recommend it strictly because of the summer heat. Are there any options, or should I just stick with stock pulley? You can spool that thing up. Crypto saying what's up. You can spool it up a little bit. Just make sure that you're tuning accordingly for it. Get you a lower thermostat. And no, I mean, I don't know, man. I get a little, when the E-Forces, I just love them in stock form because they're so much fun. But I would not go, I will say this, I would not go above 7 or 8 pounds. So just my own personal opinion. All right, so getting back to the cooling stuff. And y'all keep me on track too, because if I forget something, say, hey, what about this or what about that? Because, I get a little bit scatterbrained, start talking about something, and I just don't want to forget anything. So extreme case scenario, still talking about keeping supercharger coolant cold, right? So we talked about the bigger heat exchanger. Now, the next thing that I get asked the most is, what about insert killer chiller, iller chiller, iller, whatever it is, insert AC based units. So let's look at it like this. First of all, do they work? Yeah, they do work. Their effectiveness is they are only as effective as the ambient temperature starts to rise. Anything above roughly 52 to 55 degrees, their effectiveness increases. Anything below, say, 58, 55 degrees, it's almost like a curve that looks like this, where they're effective, they're not so much effective anymore. This comes from experience, guys. I have run and data logged a lot of those variants. So inner chiller, I've done the Kincaid, and of course the Demon and the Red Eyes. So let's start at the bottom and move up through the systems so that we can get a better understanding for which ones work and how they work and basically what's going on. Basically, the way that they work is they're using the AC condenser, I think is the side that they're using, to cool the fluid itself. Basically, it's like running your fluid across a coil that's just really cold. It just cools everything down. The least effective out of all of them are going to be the Red Eye and the Demon systems. They're just not that robust. They're not a big unit the way that the Kincaid unit is, or the inner chillers or any of those units. Those are a lot larger units, and so they have a lot larger cooling capacity than the ones that come factory on the Red Eyes and the Demons. To give you an idea, the target temperature for those units to trigger on or off basically is 50, if memory serves me correctly, it's 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything lower than 58 degrees Fahrenheit, that system won't even kick on. Now, when you think about it, it almost makes sense. There's just not enough time for air that is that cold to pick up enough heat through the system, even through the rotors, to put your discharge temperature in a high zone, if you will. Their target discharge temperature is around 115, or the coolant temperature, I'm sorry, that is targeted, if memory serves me correctly, is 115 degrees. So not necessarily hot, but not cool either, if you know what I mean. So moving away from that, you get into the intercooler, or the inner chiller, or killer chiller, sorry. The regular killer chiller, the street unit, in my opinion, is a really good unit. They've got the race valves and they've got all this other stuff. I never had any luck with those. But just a regular killer chiller, the one like Racer X has on his car, does an amazing job. And again, for any temperatures above, say 60 degrees, just because it's an easy number to remember, they really start becoming effective. But down here in the South, where you have temperatures at night that can be 80, 84, 85 degrees, that's really where those units start to shine, because you can keep those discharge temperatures lower than ambient. And that's, or not ambient, let me rephrase that. You can keep your discharge temperatures significantly lower compared to where they would be given the ambient temperatures. The reality, though, is that they're not going, you see these guys, they'll have it like with the inner chillers and everything else, where they're all iced up and everything else. The reality is that you're only really going to be able to get consistency out of those units. And this is really where I'm trying to go with all of this. Do all of them lower the temperatures? Yes, they absolutely do. But you have to remember that the velocity of the air running through those bricks is pretty substantial. And it's good to have those things sitting there. But if you've got hot, humid air hitting a very cold brick sitting there, you're going to get a lot of condensation through those systems. And that's one thing that I try to caution guys on, is just remember, when you are passing that hot, humid air, that compressed, mind you, hot, humid air through those bricks, you can, in some cases, get some condensation back there. I'm not saying that it's a super bad thing. I don't know of anybody that's had any real issues, but I have heard of some guys needing to get back there and clean things up. And, this is race car problems at that point. But the main idea here is that it keeps things more consistent. And cooler is always better, and being able to keep that temperature low in higher ambient temperatures is always a very good thing. So the next question is, What about ice tanks? Because look, if a killer chiller is good and an iller chiller y'all know what I'm talking about. If that one is better, then obviously the ice tank is the best. The ice tank, you can have circulating water at 32 degrees with one of those things. The downside is, yeah, they weigh a lot, and yeah, you're going to be going through bags of ice left and right. But in my opinion, if you're doing an event like a mile event, that's really where that ice tank is going to come into play. Or if you are just dealing with a system like the auto rotor compressor that Kenny Bell uses is a very high heat generating compressor. You're running a ton of boost. You're spinning the living hell out of one of these IHI blowers or a Whipple. In that case, yeah, you might want to run an ice tank, but the problem with ice tanks, number one, is that they're messy. They're an immediate maintenance issue. You've got to drain them after every other pass or after every pass. And those are strictly for race applications. If you try to run one of those on the street, you'll find out really quickly that they're not cool for very long. So unless you're just driving around with about 30 bags of ice in the back of the car, you're not going to get any real benefit out of it. So on a scale of 1 to 10, do I recommend any of them? So at the track, let's start with the dyno because we talked about the dyno first. On the dyno, here's the thing that we noticed with those units. They did not heat soak as badly as the vehicles that did not have that unit installed. Or let me rephrase that. They were not as affected by heat soak as the other vehicles were. So let's say the car is on the dyno and you made 4 hits back to back to back to back. And the first hit was at 165 degrees ambient and the chiller's running, everything's doing good. And you make that hit and it made 700 horsepower to the rear wheels. And you wait just a couple of minutes, let everything settle back down, fire the car back up, go to make another hit. Now your temperature is around 175, 180 degrees. Make the hit, and instead of 700 horsepower, it makes 695. Do the same thing over and over again, and let's say you end up going from 700 horsepower to 689 horsepower. Okay, that's kind of going to be your spread. The cars with an inner chiller or the Kincaid or whatever the case might be, they would be at, say, 703 because they had a little bit cooler, denser charge. And then it would kind of hover around that number regardless of, like a 2 or 3 hit average. It would always stay a little bit higher, and it would be in the later hits where you would start to see the benefit really come to the surface. If you're drag racing, especially during the summertime, that's where those systems can really pay off. But aside from that, even for me, somebody that's just out there having fun, playing around and, crushing national records, that is, I don't have one. And the reason why I don't have one is because, if you're controlling the way that the car cools off, then that's going to be the most important part of it. As far as ice tanks or anything else like that goes, the exact same would apply, except by that point, you're running compressors that are pumping so much heat on the backside of that blower that anything is going to help those cars. So there's that in a nutshell. There's your inner chiller family of products in a nutshell. So let me check in with you guys real quick, and then we're going to get into products that just run the fans and the pumps, like your Z Automotive tasers. So let's see. We're saying, where is their summer heat right now? Australia. Destroyer, and in Brazil. Destroyer 1320 saying, Professor Mason, thanks for all the knowledge. You have saved me lots of wasted money. I'm happy to help. Hopefully I did help. Summer Night saying, here in Cali, it's cold as hell. Yeah, no kidding, right? You guys are getting hit pretty hard with some cold weather. Right now, by the way, it is, it's t-shirt weather. It's about 70, I don't know, is it like 70 degrees, 75 degrees right now down here? Rift is asking, at what temperature is a car running too cold? He says it's not a dumb question at all. I do not like to make any hits at any colder than about 160 degrees. And I want to see the transmission temperature, which is actually a little bit more important to this. But I want to see the trans temperature at no less than about 130 to 140 degrees. So I want everything to be at an operating temperature, and that will ensure that your diff has already gotten up to temperature as well. But again, I just don't like seeing hits any less than 160 because it's not a realistic number in the real world. But I know of some engine dynos which will drag that temperature down to 120 or 130. That's perfectly fine, and it would probably be okay with the type of pistons that we have, but I would prefer to have the temperature a little bit higher because that is going to help the oil be a little bit less viscous, and which will obviously help it move around and get to parts, but more importantly, it'll help it drain back to the pan a little bit easier. So again, it's a little bit less effort for the oil pump, a little bit less effort for gravity to get it back into the pan at those higher temperatures. So there's that. In a dynamic environment, I would prefer to have the little bit extra temperature for those reasons, but in a static environment like a dyno, it really doesn't matter. And it's not a dumb question. It's actually a very good question. But you're saying, what up, Professor B? What happened there? Ruben saying, I was in 94 ambient and 25 degrees intercooler temp, and in the lights, very nice, 166 degrees at the finish line. Drove back to the lanes. It was already at low 30s, getting colder. F1 for the win and no ice needed. So again, that's one of the best things about these systems is that, especially for consistency and especially during the summertime, they definitely do help with that. Hey, CFL, thank you very much. That didn't pop up. Why didn't it pop up? CFL is asking, any further info on the STS 305 45 17s? Not yet. Still doing a lot of testing, still doing a lot of data acquisition on some prototype stuff, but nothing yet. So I am waiting to get some more information from Hoosier. In fact, I will be talking to them tomorrow to go over some data that I was able to collect. So still looking at into Q1, so hopefully in March. That may get pushed a little bit, and that's going to depend on the compound that will end up being used. Looking at the actual street style tire first, and then we'll be looking at something more like the ET Street Art after that. Let's see. But the STS line is something I'm really excited about. Can't wait. Sovereign Knights laughing. See, Riff saying you're pushing that supercharger to build speed that fast. Yep. Don saying hit the like button. Scat Speed said, what up, you Mason? Got the arm flex. I like it. But again, thank you very much, CFL. Keep your ears open. I'll let you guys know when I am cleared to actually talk about anything and show any pictures or anything like that. But I am gag order right now. Donald Power saying, demonology in the 8s. Flicker that light. I need to say that. Thank you very much. I like it. Crypto saying Australia. That's what I'm saying. D.All saying, having trouble choosing a cam brand, good chop and power, etc. Oh, he's looking for a cam. It depends on what kind of car, what kind of truck you got. Give Dr. Differential a shout, though. He can steer you straight for a cam that will fit your needs. In fact, there he is right below you. Give him a holler. He'll get you straightened out. So I'm not saying, what do beadlocks do for a drag car? How do they work? Great question. This will involve the prop. Hold, please. All right. So normally, the way that a tire sits on its bead, here we go. The way that the tire sits on its bead is that it slips right behind the bead itself. Air pressure will help keep everything expanded, which is one of the reasons why, especially with radials, you want to make sure you run enough pressure so that you don't have, see where my valve stem is and see where my mark is? That's how far the tire has, or the rim has spun inside the tire on these ET Street Rs. The way that a bead lock works is that this bead is not on the rim. It's only going to be able to be have the plate, which looks like a big wedding ring, that goes around this thing. It will bolt to the rim itself, which is clamping and putting actual clamping force onto the bead on the tire. So you're not relying on just the interference fit and the air pressure to hold it in place. You're actually clamping it, like having a set of, almost like having a set of vice locks on that tire. And what it does is, regardless of the pressure that you're running, that tire will not move. Hopefully this thing doesn't roll off. The tire will not move on the rim. Real popular with guys in the off-road scene, rock crawling, stuff like that, where you air the tire way down. But that's what it keeps it from happening. You saw that mark. That's what it keeps it from doing. It keeps the tire from spinning inside the rim. Let's see. Shift Nation saying, if I get a code for the 180T stat on a stock 392, how do I erase the code? Go back to stock thermostat? Kinda. You can clear the code. In some cars, they'll go a month or 2 months or 3 months without throwing a code, and then out of nowhere, you just get the ding, and the P0128 code pops up. In fact, that was actually going to be hold on, my contraption here is screaming that it's hungry. That was actually going to be the thumbnail for this video, but then I thought, well, nobody's really going to know what that means until I start yammering on about it. But yeah, mine actually threw the P0128 tonight. Like I say, it took it a while, but it finally got there. Oh, Rift is saying he thinks an inner chiller would be better for hot laps. It is. It is significantly better. Superior Fit Body LLC is asking, do cold air intakes really add horsepower? Well, I guess we can talk about that, because that is, in a way, it's engine cooling, or at least it's air charge cooling. So here's the problem with cold air intakes. None of these modern systems have any real issue keeping air cool. It doesn't really work like that with these Mopars. The idea with a cold air intake, realistically, is there's an assumption that the stock air filter is restrictive at X power level, and that anything above X power level would obviously, any power level above that, your filter is starting to turn into a restriction. So the reality is that I have run a 1012 at 136. I know what the time slip said, which was higher than that, but I don't think it was actually going that fast. But I was able to run a 1012 at 136 miles an hour. I'd been running 10 teens at 135 and change all day with the stock air filter. We have tried to run several different cold air intakes on several different applications with very little to no positive gain out of them. I've run, how many videos have I've done a ton of videos on this. So I've run AFE Momentum, I've run the Mopar cold air kit, I've run the Leg Maker cold air kits, naturally aspirated stuff, and then on the Hellcat, the supercharged applications, JLT, on the dyno, and also we've tested it on the track with a car that's making more power than mine. Didn't help. The B Woody, just the super inexpensive big filter with the tube, a little bit of everything. And as far as I can tell, I hate to say this, man, none of them made any power. Now the JLT makes a great noise. The B Woody, just the filter with a tube, makes a great noise. But the reality is that there's no performance backing up the extra theater that you get from that intake. But I will say that they sound amazing. And if you've ever thought about putting one on your car just for the sound, I'm normally not an aesthetics kind of guy, and really in this case, the sound is part of the aesthetics, but in this case, it's also, the sound is part of the theater of owning one of these cars. And I say, yeah, go for it. I mean, they're actually a lot of fun. But as far as making extra power, look, I'll put it to you like this. One of the cars that runs in the group is a 285 upper car. It's a 9-second car. Pretty, I'm not going to say plain vanilla, but you see a lot of 9-second car combinations. And this one is like how to run nines with practically nothing done to your car except for a pulley. It's running on 93 octane with a little bit of the boosting, okay? That car with the stock airbox and the stock filter ran identical times to when it had the JLT cold air intake. When I say identical, it's actually run faster. That's right, I said faster with the stock airbox and the stock filter. So just food for thought there. I would never say don't buy one if you're only buying it for the sound. But if you're buying it because you are attempting to find hidden horsepower, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. Be more concerned about the filter that you put into your stock airbox than anything else. I've done data log testing on the green filter, which is arguably the least restrictive of any of the drop-in filters, and it did not lose out to the stock paper filter, but it didn't do any better. It didn't do marketably better anywhere. In fact, you can kind of make an argument that it did worse based on KPA readings. So, I don't know. There's that to consider. And I know that sounds trippy and it's counterintuitive to what you've been told, but I ain't gonna lie to you. That's just what we've seen and what we've actually logged at the drag strip. We're talking data logs that are looking at single-digit points on the KPA readings on Hellcats and on naturally aspirated stuff with no variance from vehicle to vehicle. No KPA variance means no boost variance. So hopefully that answers the question. Shane saying, what up, B? Any thoughts on the Torque Storm supercharger on a 5.7 Challenger with a pulley heads, Cam 373 gear, Nag 1 car? Be a lot of fun. Be a whole lot of fun. Torque Storm's a fun blower because it's got a little bit more aggressive impeller and you're not spinning it as fast, but it's a lot like the old Powerdyne superchargers where they just were really good street superchargers. Rick is saying maybe run a 190 thermostat. Can do that. Let's see. Madera's asking, why did 410 gears go in, I guess saying lose favor in cars? Is it because 410 is too aggressive outside of diesel or towing? The reason why 410s lost favor recently is because the transmission gear ratios are so aggressive that you would never move past a walking pace in first gear if you had 410 gears. Relatively speaking, I know that the Ram guys all have the 392 gears, 3.92 gear ratio, and they all run a 28-inch tall tire. I get it, but relatively speaking, that's equivalent to having like 456 gears in your car. So, and that's just because you've got a 4.71 first gear, multiply that by your final drive, and you can kind of see that, well, man, these gear ratios are getting real aggressive. So in essence, because of the double overdrives or triple overdrives in some cases, you just don't need to have the rear end because you've got all of your torque multiplication being handled by your transmission, not your rear end. And then the rear end is basically just along for the ride to give you fuel economy once you start getting up to highway speed and you go into overdrive number 1, then overdrive number 2, and you kind of see where that's going. But that's why all of your heavy lifting is done in the transmission now as opposed to being done in the rear end. Let's see. Oh, Ship is saying, do you have a part number? And Sovereign's saying something's awesome. Let's see. Rich saying he's got the 180 thermostat. Sovereign saying, I asked that question as Demonology is going to put those on the Soul Snatcher and wanted to know if what it would do for the car. Limecat found some bead locks for Herman. Yep, that's what they do. Rich said, I think the JLT works well with the Hellcat other than the stock intake. I mean, it sounds good. It looks good. We just, at that power level, we just weren't seeing any gains with it. And like I say, it's, you know, when we're, okay, so then you're talking about a group of guys that have, I mean, between the three of us or four of us, probably 600 passes in the last couple of years with these cars. Shit, more than that. Anyway, we've got a ton of passes with these things, and we've got so much data on them that, I mean, I'll put you like this. We were trying to find parts that would work. I mean, if there's just anything that could possibly work, would it work? We couldn't really find anything. So with that being said, let's get back into the topic here, cooling mods. So we've talked about, what have we talked about so far? We've talked about thermostats. We know that gets a definite check mark. We've talked about the interkiller killer chillers. I'll say that depending on what you're actually doing with the car, it gets kind of a check minus. I like them. I like what they do, but I don't think that they're going to be for everybody. Now, we can also talk about the blower spacer. This is the phalonic spacer that goes between the cylinder head and the supercharger. So the theory behind this is an old one, and the idea is that you are separating the compressor itself. Look, if I'm eating a big hamburger. You're separating the compressor itself from the cylinder heads, trying to keep heat transfer from taking place from the heads into the blower. Basically, you're just making a heat circuit there. The idea with running the blower spacers is to stop the heat circuit, in essence, by running a phalonic spacer, keeping the heat from bleeding into the supercharger. All right, well, in theory, it sounds pretty sound. Does it really work in practice? And I know that there was some marketing about increasing boost or something, and there was something else going on with that thing. Look, there's a car running around with those things on it right now that we have tested at the drag strip and on the dyno over and over and over again. And I'm going to stop short of saying that it's snake oil. I don't think that it is. It does keep the blower itself a little bit cooler. But by how much? Well, no real way to tell. I mean, you can heat gun them, but sometimes heat guns don't tell the whole story. How long you can keep your hand on the thing is another good test, I guess. But the reality is they work, they keep the blower cooler, but I'm not going to say that we've seen any benefit from having the blower be any cooler. And that's kind of a weird thing. In fact, I actually thought that those blower spacers had a little bit of, well, I thought they had some merit to them. And I also thought that of all the things that we had played around with, whether it was, you know, aside from the thermostats, I actually thought that that one might have had the most chance of doing some good. And I'm not going to say that they don't add some level of benefit. The problem is that now it's getting really difficult to find by how much did they help. In other words, what is the delta? How much did they actually pick up? The issue here is that it was by not enough to really notice on back-to-back-to-back hits on back-to-back-to-back nights at the drag strip. You know, we're talking about a car that at the time was running, you know, 1030s, 1040s, and the spacers go on the car and it's still running 1030s and 1040s. Really, at this stage of the game, the question really turns into, is it running more 1030s now than 1040s? Because you're getting down into this like halves of tenths and quarters of tenths for a gain, and you got to weigh the cost of that based on, you know, base the cost of the contraption that you're buying on these numbers that are starting to get more and more difficult to to quantify. And again, then you get into the density, altitude, and then you get into the, just everything starts to come into play, and you have to dissect it that far. You can't just put the part on the car, run it, and if it goes faster, it did good. If it goes slower, it didn't, because, well, quite honestly, the DA has a lot to say in terms of how these cars are going to run. Like tonight, again, low barometric pressure, kind of hazy, kind of foggy. This thing isn't making much boost. I mean, its KPA was only like 172, something like that. It's low boost. So in those conditions, you know, you're not generating a ton of heat. You're not going to see a lot of gains with that kind of part. And I know on some of these guys, I'm going to do a full stop here. I know a lot of this sounds like I'm really breaking this stuff down a little bit too much, and I'm yammering on a little bit too much about some of these parts. But you got to remember that we are researching and testing these things. We are researching and testing these things to the nth degree, because we have to test them to the nth degree to find any actual gain. And that should really tell you more about how efficient your stock system is versus how good these other systems are. To where you have to go and literally dig and find and scratch and peel everything back to find some level of a gain. That's really more the story here than whether or not one of those units works to what degree. So, all right, so we've talked about the thermostats. We've talked about cooling the coolant, whether it's with an air-to-water, larger air-to-water heat exchanger. We've talked about the inner chiller, killer chillers. We've talked about ice tanks. We've talked about the blower spacer itself. And we've talked a little bit about cold air intakes. Aside from those things, you know, we got, you know, hood vents and all this other stuff. Haven't seen any gain with any of that. I know that there have been guys that have gone really out of their way, you know, like with the NA cars, cooling the intake charge, the brake duct mod on Scat Packs and SRTs. For the 15 and up cars, there's that you can look into. There's other variations of, you know, like again, the cold air intakes where you're trying to duct air and you're foaming things up and blocking stuff off and doing all of that. Haven't seen any of that actually work. There is one kind of a sleight of hand trick that you can play with the naturally aspirated cars when it comes to cooling, and that is to relocate the air temperature sensor to the air box. Mine was relocated to the front of the air box. The reason why I did that is that I noticed that whenever I would hit the air box with the temp gun, and then I would hit the manifold with the temp gun, that is where the two temperatures were basically the same. The tube and everything that was connecting everything to the manifold was right in the middle of the heat wash of the fan. The fan was just washing all the radiator heat that it would, you know, suck it off the radiator. It was washing that right over that tube, in effect heat soaking the tube, which was giving a hotter reading to the actual sensor itself. Now, you know, some would argue that that doesn't matter, because once you whack the throttle, you get a big hit of air goes through there, cools everything off. But in my drag racing testing, the thing that I noticed is that it was in the process of loading and then going to wide open throttle that I was actually in a hot spark table. And as the car cooled off, it would come out of that hot spark table. That's why when I moved it, I didn't run into that problem. And then in hotter temperatures, I was running more consistent times and a little bit quicker too. So as far as stuff that works, when I say you're digging into this thing, I mean, you're digging into it to the point where you're coming up with creative solutions to reposition a sensor in an effort to pick up, you know, 0.04 of a second. Little things like that look great on a forum page and go, yeah, look, I just went 1130s at full weight. That gets a lot of people's attention, but it's diving into these things and just literally picking apart every last little detail that nobody else takes a look at, those are the details that get you on the top of the leaderboard instead of somewhere in the middle. Superior Fit says, thanks, I do like the wine. Then I say, go for it, grab you one. Scavengers 1320 saying, sub B, and everyone, first time joining one of your lives. Thanks for hanging out, man. Appreciate it. Glad to have you. Ripped is saying, it's all about that wine unless you have a really small pulley on there. That's, yeah, I'll say. Let's see. Oh, Ruben's saying, if you're in California, the JLT intake is California carb legal and come with carb sticker. Plus, you get a louder supercharger wine. Very nice. Rip's checking in with 1320. Still waiting on that smog sticker. AQ37 saying, another disadvantage with 14 gears and other steep ratios is that they tend to be more noisy. Yeah, some of them do. I mean, there's a lot of factory 410s, 456s for that matter. But Moderna's saying, if you want to reap benefits from a cold air, you basically have to also swap your exhaust. Not necessarily. The exhaust in these cars is really good. And I mean, look, we've got guys running, well, mid to low nines with stock manifolds. We've got that same car that we've tested, or he's tested, and I've just reaped the benefits and been able to data log his car with all the different cooling mods and all this other stuff. That car is running 970s with stock catalytic converters. And let's not forget that those are the same catalytic converters and exhaust system that's hanging underneath every red eye and demon that's running around out there. So a little something for you about that exhaust system stuff. Not always needed to get swapped out. Rick is saying, I always thought that the smaller pulley you have, meaning the more boost it's making, it would make the cold air intake worth it. Only after a certain point. And so this is where I want to be real clear. The stock airbox is really good. And I know that there are guys that'll argue that, well, there's a reason why the Demon has the air intake system that it does. I won't argue with that. Same with the Red Eye and the new Hellcats and everything else, even though I've been doing, I mean, look, my business has been showing my ass to Red Eyes and a few Demons, and let me tell you, business is a booming. So I'll say that stock airbox is not too shabby along with that stock filter. However, that's on 93 octane. Things start getting a little bit more serious. Well, we know how that goes. But the fact of the matter is that you've got a situation working for you here where those systems are pretty good. But again, we're finding that above, say, 800 horsepower to the rear wheels, and this is on a Mustang dyno, and that 800 horsepower is really closer to 900 on a dyno jet. Stock airbox doesn't really give anything up to some of these aftermarket units. And the aftermarket units start really picking up in those areas because if you're on a dyno, got the hood open, you got the fans blowing the cold air over that filter. They're not picking up the under hood air. So at that point, they're a hot air intake. You're just not running into that problem at that point on the dyno because, again, it's stationary. The hood's open and all of that stuff's going on. So when you're in that type of a situation, you can see a benefit out of those types of intakes. The problem is that I haven't seen it work at the track on a Hellcat or on an NA, a 392. I haven't seen those intakes work better in a Challenger. And this is kind of Challenger specific because you start getting into Hellcat airboxes and things like that. The earlier Challengers are kind of a pain in the ass to install. It's got to take the front face off. But not huge differences. So anyway, just know that coming into this, you know, I've looked into it. I've tried to find an intake that would make more power, and I am still coming up snake eyes on that. But again, to answer the question, I don't know, honestly, because I've seen cars run 940s with the stock airbox. It wasn't restrictive then. Now it's a 940 stock airbox, no filter, but a lot of guys are running no filter once they get to that particular power level. So I don't know. So far, I'm just not seeing a benefit to going with one of these other units based on practical application. And here's the other thing I want to bring to light here. For you guys that are daily driving these cars, let's say you're driving them on the weekends at least, that stock air filter does a really good, I'm talking about the Hellcat stock air filter, does an amazing job of filtering out particulates, all the while flowing well enough for me to just about run 9s with my stock boosted little mistress sitting behind me. So does it make sense for me to try something different? Well, yeah, of course it does. But every time we've tried something different, again, it didn't make any more power, and that's even on some of the higher horsepower combinations that have rolled across the dyno. And I'll take that a step further. So I always go back to the Tale of Two Hellcats on this. Racer X's car versus a guy by the name of Manuel. Both of them had Bravo packages. Both of them were in the shop at the same time. And I had the unenviable task of both dynoing the cars and sending them out into the world. And one of the things that we noticed was that long tube headers didn't make any difference on the Hellcats. And the other thing that because Manuel's car had long tubes and Racer X's car did not. Manuel's car had a 2.62 rear end where Racer X has a 309. And Manuel's car had the JLT intake, and Racer X's car has the stock intake on it. At that time, it had the stock filter in the box too, by the way. Manuel's car made 815 or 817 horsepower. Racer X's car made 808 or 810 horsepower to the rear wheels, if memory serves me correctly. Basically, it was a dyno variance between the two, and part of that could have been chalked up to the fact that Manuel's car is running 262 gears, but will typically put down a slightly higher number on the dyno. In other words, there was no real difference from the cold air, a known, very well respected and strong performing cold air versus the stock airbox with a stock filter. Had I pulled the filter out of his car, it would have been a lot closer. So just saying, food for thought on that deal. Let's see. Oh, Rick is asking Ruben about the F1 when the inner chiller is on. How much does it affect it? I will let him give his experience. I never noticed a big difference, but I didn't spend a lot of time with him. That was in Trackhawk. So, all right, saying questions for cooling. What about liquid nitrogen? Is that a practical to use cooling system? Absolutely not. Liquid nitrogen would be a god-awful unit to work with. And in terms of plumbing it, like a direct plumb into a, you would be plumbing that through a matrix and having the air run through that. It just wouldn't necessarily be better. Plus, it would be a packaging nightmare. Kid797 saying, F1 air chillers advise that one of the benefits to the spacer is eventually you may get leakage from the stock intake gaskets. Man, we've got some of these things with 160, 180,000 miles on the stock power plant and don't have any issues. That's pandering to, or that's fear mongering. And as far as I'm concerned, that is bad marketing, very bad marketing. So yeah, just for that reason alone, I wouldn't buy them, but I get why people would buy them. And I don't like that kind of stuff. I don't like selling into fear, like, oh, it might happen. It might, dude, we've got some of these cars that you would think they've got enough miles on them. You'd think they're a freaking Lyft or an Uber driver. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. We've got many guys that have been using Chargers as dailies and Trackhawks as dailies with 60, 70, 80 odd thousand miles on them. I mean, look, and several of the Chargers have over 100, it's well over 100,000 miles on them. When are these things going to fail? At what point do they fail? Haven't seen it yet. Is there a number that they're trying to get to? At what mileage do they fail? Where is this evidence coming from, this failure evidence that is going to scare me into buying those things, and only to get the benefit of, not only to get the benefit of a cooler blower, but that something may fail. I haven't seen it. And since I haven't seen it, and I've seen a bunch of these cars being used in all manners of different capacities, daily driven, race car, and everything in between, kind of makes me wonder a little bit. Anyway. HE37 saying some good amount of cooling with the water mesh systems. So, good point. Good time to segue into one of the biggest questions that always comes up, which is, what about water meth injection? How does that work in terms of cooling? Does it cool the supercharger? Does it cool the air charge? Are there any benefits? Are there any things to look out for? What should I be cautious about? So here's the thing. First of all, naturally aspirated, don't waste your time. You're nowhere near the limits of modern gasoline. If you're running a stock car, stock compression, stock heads, you will not see any benefit from running water meth. It won't. You're going to be introducing octane where you don't need it, and you're not going to be adjusting timing to accommodate for it, and you don't have the manifold pressure there to actually take advantage of any real charge cooling that you would get from it. It's just not going to work. The downside to water meth, let's talk about the positives first. The idea behind it is that it cools the intake charge and adds octane along the way. There you have it. Without getting overly, brainy on you, that's what the stuff is there to do. Water methanol injection, by the way, guys, has been employed since the 19-teens on engines. The way that it was employed was direct port injection, either direct methanol injection, in some cases very fine mists of water injection, or a combination of the two. Most of them would have methanol injection. It would have some component of water and then another component of a corrosion inhibitor, typically about 4% of the fluid itself. When those units were employed, they were employed specifically to raise the octane or the knock threshold of the fuel, and in this case, they were being used as an octane supplement so that higher boost levels, or in this case, manifold pressures, could be achieved and therefore make more power under those circumstances. So now you know the history of methanol injection. By the way, nitrous has been around for about as long too. Now, how does that work for a boosted application? Because I'm not even going to get into whether or not it's worth messing with on an NA car, because it's not unless you are specifically tuning for the higher octane. And Hemis don't really respond well to that anyway, so there's that. In a boosted application, the idea is to cool the air charge, and in also cooling the air charge, add a specific amount of octane, hopefully as a buffer, and you're not tuning on it. It's not a good idea to tune on a system like that. It really only works well in a direct port application. The only caveat to that is unless you're running a carbureted application and you're running methanol as your fuel source. In that application, it's dragging all the heat. There's charge cooling, which just with the fact that you're sucking air through water in this case, or through methanol, I should say. But that's the extreme example of what you have to do with methanol injection to actually take advantage of a charge cooling effect. The issue is, and the question is, distribution. And I don't have an intake manifold here to show you, but when I'm porting manifolds, one of the tricks that I do to blow out some of the funk that as you're in there, cutting the polymer, you got to get that stuff out of there somehow. And I've got an awesome Ryobi leaf blower. Inlet, or the outlet, is just about the same size as what I port those manifolds to. It's battery powered. Stick the thing in the manifold and gas the hell out of it. Interestingly enough, not that this really matters, but you will real quickly discover that air doesn't just come out of all 8 ports evenly. You'll have the 2 outside in the front blow fairly hard, the 2 in the back blow real hard, some in the middle don't really blow out much at all. Now, I'm not saying that that's equivalent to the dynamic situation that's going on in the engine where you have valves opening, closing, you have primary, secondary waves, things like that going on inside that intake manifold. The point here is that that manifold does a great job of flowing air, does a terrible job of flowing liquid. It's not designed like that. This is not a carbureted intake manifold. So what ends up happening is you may have cylinders 7 and 8 getting a lot more meth injection than they need, and cylinders 2 and 3 not getting near enough, especially if you're trying to really turn the wick up on it. You go, well, my standalone air fuel ratio gauge is saying that everything looks fine. Well, on an average base, that may be true, but you don't have O2s on each and every cylinder in that engine. But if you did, you'd start to find out pretty quickly that the distribution can get a little bit wonky. And this is the case with nitrous, which is a gas, by the way, not just the case with water meth, which is a liquid and a liquid, where nitrous is a gas and the gasoline on a wet shot would be the liquid. So you can kind of understand that my initial thoughts would be I wouldn't necessarily run it unless you're running the lid, and there's a nitrous express lid that does a pretty good job of maybe managing some of that distribution question because it'll fog basically into the lid. The issue though is that you still have the rotors that it's going to be going through. The rotors are going to act as a nucleation site. In other words, it's going to puddle up in the rotors. And again, it's just going to be funneling that water meth mixture to wherever it ends up. It's not going to be a very clean process. It's not going to be as precise as what you would like for it to be. So just know that coming into it. Now, I'm not going to say that it doesn't work. It works in some respects in terms of charge cooling, but I will caution you as far as tuning with it. I would simply use it in very small amounts as a supplement to what you are already running. I have told the story over and over again about an LS3 swapped Jeep that we had in the shop that had a Maggie supercharger on it. And I didn't realize when I was, it was basically, hey, go data log that thing. I was like, okay, well, let me go data log that thing. Nowhere on the build sheet did it have anything remotely telling me that this thing was basically living off of meth injection. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw injector duty cycles of 99 and 101% come rolling across my data logger. I just about died when I saw that. I thought I was going to blow the thing up if I did any more high load testing with it. Only to basically get back to the shop and find that not only was it running a serious meth kit, but it had basically a cooler in the back about the size of a case of beer full of boost juice. They knew what they were doing. It just doesn't sit well with me. Anyway, my experience, yours may differ, but so far as I can tell, for a street car, don't really need it. And if you're on E85, you really don't need it because you've got 30% more fuel going into that combustion chamber, and it's alcohol, and it'll suck up whatever heat that it can. It'll do a better job of that meth injection. Because for practical applications, it just doesn't work well. Now, if you've got a tunnel ram style of an intake manifold with long runners, and you can put individual port meth injection on it, and you're hitting it with like an F1 supercharger, like a Pro Charger centrifugal setup, I can see where that would help. But again, without kicking this dead horse too hard in the head anymore. I'm like, I'm just not a big fan of it. Let's see. Ruben's saying my ITC temps will be better than normal if I run the AC. Yep. At the track, I use the inner chiller after a pass on a hot day. I just flick the button and have amazing cold cabin instantly. Yeah, those things are really awesome on that, by the way. Riff saying, I noticed that the Hellcat read very hot for intake air temp. They do, and the reason for that, believe it or not, is that you've got several different sensors that it's looking at, and you are actually reading manifold air temp, not intake air temp, the way that you do on the NA cars. Jamie's asking, would wrapping the intake tube work instead of relocating the sensor? I've heard of guys doing that, and I have tried it myself, and I didn't see any real difference. So I went to the relocation idea. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it just gets baked for so long that there's no real benefit to the wrap at some point. So let's see. Catalyst asking, do you like the F8 green? Love the F8 green. And why did they get rid of Sublime? Because nobody was buying it. And I like Sublime too. Scavenger's asking, or saying, I used to run one of those IAT gizmos that lets you change the reading from the cabin on one of my old Rams. Yeah, and Riff saying, I've seen the Hellcat intakes with the open headlight work well on 392s. Yep, that was what mine was, just like that. Jonathan saying, hey, B, what's going on? Took my mistress, Skylar, I like it, out tonight, and she's running great. I hit a 4.0, 0 to 60, not bad. Feels like I can do a 3.8 if I tweak the tires a bit. Running the Tri-5 R2s at 31. Very nice. Launching at 1700. Launch control, probably not running launch control on that, but that's really good, and keep up the practice, man. That's a great number, man. I'm happy for you. That's great. Jonathan saying, hi. Try launching it at around 1500 and foot brake it. Slime Coon is saying, what wheel horsepower level do you recommend pulling the stock air filter at the drag strip for Hellcat? Man, about 800, honestly. I don't know that there's much of a gain, although we will be testing that this weekend, or on Friday, but I don't know that there is much of anything to be gained by pulling it on any lower horsepower levels, just because I haven't seen the benefit yet. So, but we're going to give it a shot and see what it does, because that's going to be one of the tests that I do. Filter versus no filter. Jared's asking, got the arm flex. I like to say, baby, what's your input on MDS lifter failure, and would you recommend removal of MDS either physically or via something like a Diablo? Stepping into a Jeep SRT tomorrow that is just out of warranty. So the problem is the lifter itself, but I would absolutely recommend killing MDS in the tune, primarily because it's annoying as hell. But the MDS failures, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's MDS. And keep in mind, before we get into what I think the problems are with the Dodge products, or FCA, Mopar, which includes RAM and all that. Before I get into that, let's not forget all the DOD, which is the same as MDS. MDS is multiple displacement system. DOD is displacement on demand for GM. If you get bored to tears, go to your local Google, pull it up, and then type in DOD lifter failure, and be ready to be, serenaded with everybody's lamentations of their problems with the GM system. So it's a lifter issue, and that's really what it is. I know that there was somebody talking about the fact that there was the angle of the dangle that the Uncle Tony's garage guy doesn't get lubricated. It's like, yeah, it gets lubricated, dude. Because if that were the case, you would have had cars before MDS having failures, and you would have had Hellcats having failures, and you would have had manual 5.7 cars having failures where you just don't see those issues because they don't use the MDS lifters. What we had seen at the shop with bad lifters was about 90% of the time it was an MDS lifter that let go. That's just what we saw. And so, I mean, if it waddles and quacks, what do you call it, right? So anyway, DOD on the GM side, same issues as Dodge on the MDS side of the fence. The real trick is to kill MDS, pull the heads off of it, put a set of Hellcat lifters in it, and call it good. There is a conversion kit that Dodge actually sells that you only replace the MDS lifters, and it comes with the MDS plugs. You probably do that too, but again, you'd still have to take the heads off to get the lifters out. Why not throw a known good set of lifters in it? But the long and short of it is that when you look at the failure rate, it's significantly less than X%. And I did a video on this a long while back, and I still stand behind what I said before. You know, there was never a recall done because I don't think that more than 2 or 3% of the engines actually ever suffered through it. Now, it is fairly true, and I think that there is some validity if you say that if the vehicle goes through any long periods of idling, that would cause an issue. But I'm going to caution you there. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say that, and I forget the name of the guy. I actually like the channel, and I apologize for not knowing it off the top of my head. FCA Tech had a really good point. And I'm going to agree with this, especially coming from like a more, my just historical, I should say my interests initially were all in aviation, on the aviation side, and boats as well, where you do everything and you do all your maintenance in hours. A lot of the vehicles that have failures, whether it's GM or Dodge, a lot of those vehicles spend a lot of their time idling. And so what happens is, the oil simply breaks down over any given amount of time. And in this case, if it's spending hours upon hours idling and then drives 30 minutes home, well, most of the engine's runtime is actually at idle. Fairly low oil pressure, and again, you're just churning oil, still breaking it down. So in my opinion, if you change the oil, if you do a lot of idling, if you do a lot of dusty conditions driving, you're on job sites a lot, you know the drill here. Take your oil change interval and cut it in half, or take a third of that off of there. You know, if you're typically changing your oil every 6,000 miles or less, which you should be doing, and you cut that down to 4,000 miles, I'm pretty sure you'll be just fine. And that's, I think, what needs to take place. Now, you just don't see failures with the manual vehicles or the Hellcats that don't have the MDS lifters. They don't have that system in play. There's a few other hypotheses out there that gave some kind of softball credibility to the idea that it could be an oiling issue, but I don't think that it is. I think that you're dealing with, first of all, vehicles that are running 0W20 oil, which should be a good oil, should be able to, pump and get around and lubricate everything just fine. Whereas a lot of folks are like myself, I run 040 and everything. And so it could be an oil quality issue also. But again, I just go back to, if it's going to idle for any real length of time, lots of short trips or whatever, just change the oil at 4,000 miles and go from there, and just consider them a little bit more sensitive to maintenance, which would make sense too. I mean, let's be real, guys. You're talking about engines that are making what would have been race car levels of horsepower and torque 20 years ago, right? I mean, 5.7 trucks blow my mind. It's like you have an LS6 in your truck. They make basically 400 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque, or basically what an 04 Z06 made. Think of that for a minute. So anyway, I digress. But the point of it is, if you're going to run it hard, and that is a hard condition, by the way, is idling, then just maintain it a little bit more aggressively. Chris is asking, can I throw some race gas in my full bolt-on cam 100 shot of nitrous on my stock fuel system, not have any issues? Absolutely. Sunoco GT 260 is what you're going to be looking for. You can buy it in pails. And I love that fuel, and it's unleaded. So you're not going to hurt your O2s, and you're not going to hurt your catalytic converters if you're still running catalytic converters. But you see what my point is. It's good stuff. Also, what I need to upgrade to a bottle heater over a bottle blanket, considering I don't do hit after hit of 100 shot of nitrous. You can. As I'm saying, as long as your bottle pressure is above 900, 950, you'll be in good shape. So, Jeff B saying flow bench it. Scavenger saying, at Madar, I've had 3 Mopars go over 100,000 miles. My 12 Avenger RT is at 120 right now and runs perfect. Sold my O2 Ram at 137,000, which also ran perfect at my 97 Ram at 116. They're good cars. Scotty, cough, cough. What did I miss? I think I missed something. Anyway, what did I miss? HU37 said, I wouldn't use water methanol with positive displacement supercharger. I have a centrifugal supercharger in my Mustang. I'm thinking about running water meth to each intake. Run your thoughts. That's the best way to do it. Let's see. Somebody's checking in with Scavenger. Oh, saying he did wrap most of his intake and it helped to lower it, but just didn't help as much as he would have liked. Same here. I just didn't see much of a difference. Let's see. Oh, Ripped is saying, not really liking the 305 45 17 Mickey Thompson ET Street Rs. I feel like to get the best tire, you need a 315 50. I don't know, man. We've run some pretty sick times. I mean, Racer X just ran 940s with the 305 45 17s. So I like them, but, some guys actually prefer the bigger footprint. I can tell you that car I was telling you about that's running 970s is running the 315s. More sidewall, you get a little bit better footprint with it too, which helps you honestly in, funky track conditions. Rich saying, just ordered a Surface Pro 3 and the MPVI2 HP2 cable, hoping it'll be worth it. How easy is it to adjust certain things without hurting your motor? Depends on what you're adjusting and what you're doing to it, but it's easy to make adjustments. It's real easy to make adjustments. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's also real easy to blow your motor up. So I don't know, man. CJ's asking for a 17 Ram Hemi. What tuner do you recommend in terms of software, HP tuners, and in terms of who would I let touch mine? It would either be Doc Differential or Alex Pites at Pites Performance. Would be the only two. Chris Harris saying, yeah, I'm not running any cats. I have the innovative PS1 gauge right now and want race gas. Would you recommend, could I only use it at the track? You can run GT260 everywhere because it's unleaded. And I want to say that GT260 Plus, which is 104 octane, is about it's the highest octane unleaded race gas that's floating around out there. So you got those two options. I've run and played with GT260 quite a bit, and I really like it. Madara saying, you missed my comment on Mopars and mileage. Did I? What was the comment? Shoot the comment back up again, man. I'm not seeing it popping up here. There was one comment that was deleted, so I don't know why it was deleted, but if somebody found it to be outside the parameters, maybe that's why. But Mopars and mileage do just fine. Like I said, we've got some trucks in the fleet at the company that I work for. They're all Mopars, 25 of them, I think, just in my region alone. And we've got several of them already at 230, 240,000 miles, and these are 2017 trucks. And just keep on trucking. Mine's one of the few that actually had to be taken into the shop for the exhaust manifold bolts. A lot of them haven't even had to have that done. So, yeah, old Buffy, she's a trooper. So, getting back to the topic. So, we've talked about thermostats. We've talked about keeping the blower, your secondary radiators, as it's known, keeping that system nice and cool. We've talked about cold air intakes. We've talked about wrapping tubes. We've talked about relocating air temperature sensors. Guys, all I can tell you is this. When it comes to cooling mods, the best advice I can give you is thermostat number one, because you've got to get the temperatures down. Also, keep in mind that your oil cooler is actually part of, it's cooled by coolant. So the cooler those temperatures are, the cooler you can keep that oil temperature as well, which might help. We're talking about lifter failures and things like that. It might be a step in the right direction maybe to help keep the oil a little bit cooler. Maybe it helps it to lubricate a little bit better on those lifters, MDS wise anyway. But definitely a thermostat, no doubt about it. Anything outside of a thermostat, if you've got a naturally aspirated vehicle, maybe relocating the air temperature sensor on the NA cars to the air box might help. But for the most part, unfortunately, I haven't found anything that really works all that well. For the trucks, I mean, there are some race intakes that I know for a fact work great. There's some stuff for the cars, but there's just not quite as much room in there to play with, and so the trucks have a little bit more of an efficient system. But man, I'll be real honest with you. When it comes to intakes, it's just really tough to beat the Hellcat systems. They're known very strong performing setups. So I think I've pretty much rounded off everything I can think of when it comes to cooling mods. If you've got a Hellcat, then obviously the inner chiller, killer chillers are all very strong performing products that give some benefit, but really only when the air temperature is above, I'm going to say 68 to 70 degrees ambience, when they really start to come into their own. Anything less than that, not going to help you so much. Spacers, haven't seen it help, but I kind of get the idea. So it's one of those situations, if you're going to stay involved with your car and you've got a Hellcat and you just are dying to do something to it, maybe you do that. But I don't know. To me, I haven't seen the benefit of them yet. And I mean, I got to be shown that they're going to be a net gain in terms of, better ETs, better horsepower. Something is going to be better with it. And so far, their claims are basically falling pretty flat, at least in my experience. So can't think of any other cooling mods. Hopefully that answers a lot of those questions. Jeffrey's asking, with a 180 T-stat using a tuner, what temps should I make the fans turn on at? So if you've got a Hellcat, which is running on pulse width modulation, you're going to set your pulse width at about 190 degrees. You're going to have your low speeds come on at 190 or 192. Your medium is going to be at 194, and your highs are going to be at 196. If you've got an NA setup, then you're going to set everything, basically you're going to hover everything around 190 degrees. High speed will kick on at about 194, give or take. Marco's asking, cam or supercharger for 5.7 Ram, Hemi Ram? If you're not going to do both, I would say throw an E-Force on it. You'll have a lot more fun with it. But it'll do a whole lot better if you've got a cam. It just depends on what you're looking to do with the truck, man. I mean, if you want to get out there and just have fun and you want, a little bit more theater and a little bit more sound, you can't go wrong with a cam. Supercharging, you always have the power, but it's a significantly more expensive proposition. So obviously, you got to get more, you got to spend more. Edward's asking, any thoughts on installing a wide body? Does it hurt the value for a high quality kit? Value is all in the eyes of the coin holder, right? If it's a high quality kit, there's going to be somebody that's going to recognize it as a high quality kit and they won't mind spending the money for it. But that starts to turn into a very specific buyer. A lot of guys won't even notice it, if I'm being honest. If somebody's just really not a car guy and they look at it, they think it looks cool, then they're really not going to have a problem with it. Some places, though, or some people are in a place, I should say, where they're going to recognize it as not being stock, and a lot of Mopar guys are pretty traditional when it comes to their opinions of things. And so in that case, yeah, you might find out that, you know, running with a different body kit could end up hurting the value in the long run. A lot of times body kits and things like that, they can make the car a little bit dated. So just know that if you put that kit on the car, you might have just started a clock ticking, and your value that you can get out of that vehicle may start to drop after some point in time. Can't tell you when that's going to be, but just make sure when you say it's a high quality kit, it's the highest quality kit that you can find, because if it's not and it's not installed properly, ooh, that's going to be bad. All the best. Scavenger saying, I said this was my first B Mason live, but definitely not my last. One of the best lives for sure, and great info, unlike that old vid you did about the 1320, but I got over it. Well, the thing is so I don't know if you had a chance to, well, this is the first live you've been on in a while. So I have had a pretty significant change of heart about the 1320. And I don't know exactly what video you're referencing. I've mentioned it on a few times. And I think one of the videos I said specifically about the 1320s, I didn't really think that it was worth the money. I've done a little bit of a 180 on that. I've got a good friend of mine, Ray, that actually liked him so much he bought two 1320s. And he and I got a chance to spend about 2 hours in that car one night on the street, making hit after hit after hit after hit. And it's funny because Ray and I are very competitive. And so if I went a 12-2 on the street, he was going to go a 12-1 no matter what. And we were going back and forth, trading spots. The track was closed for an event. We didn't know it. We go to the track. That happens. I happen to live in an area where you can get away with this kind of stuff. And we made hit after hit after hit after hit for about 2 hours. We took a couple of breaks to grab something to eat. But anyway, long story short, it was so much fun. And the way that the cars launch and the way that they go down in this case, the street, we just had so much fun. And I was able to see and really kind of have the light turned on for me as far as the value of the 1320. So I went from being very skeptical and not being all that wound up about the 1320 to actually kind of falling in love with that thing a little bit. So, you know, my mind has been changed for sure. Jonathan saying, got one of those OBD2 gauge apps for the 392. I'm seeing if I can find the AFR PID, the air fuel ratio. Can't seem to find the readout on my 5.9. Yeah, I don't know where that would be. Look for fuel air, and don't look it up under air fuel. Look it up under fuel air. That's how Mopars register their stuff. They put fuel first and then air, and it's a percentage of fuel to air, not air to fuel. Lalo's asking, what would I recommend for a Scat Pack 2019, 305 or 315, and which tires do you recommend? Well, if we're talking about a Scat Pack Challenger, I'm going to tell you that you cannot go wrong. I cannot believe I'm going to say this. You cannot go wrong with the Nitto Tri-5 R2s. There, I said it. Ugh. Check out my video on those tires, and I'm being a little bit over dramatic about it, but the fact of the matter is that I don't like the way that they look. They do run a little bit wide, which is fine if you're putting them on a stock tire or stock wheel. If you want to go with the 275 40s, they'll look good. The thing is I think the sidewall livery on them is a little bit too busy, especially when you compare them to really clean looks like the Nicky Thompson ET Street SS, which is a really good tire also, just not as good in the wet. Doesn't last as long as the Nitto. Or the outgoing. I'm a little bit butthurt that the Tri-5R is an outgoing tire. Another amazingly good tire from Nitto with very clean lines and a very proper width for its rating. The Nitto 555 R2 is a little bit wider by comparison. If you park them next to each other, the Tri-5 R2 is about as wide as a 315 is. So just mind the fact that if you're not putting them on 10.5-inch wide tires, you're putting them on your stock wheels, just know that they are going to be a little bit wider. But they've also got a little bit more gap in them to help them channel water a little bit better. As far as drag radials go, they're a decent enough drag radial. They're not going to be the top tier drag radial in terms of traction, but they will be really good in terms of being just a very versatile tire in general. Oh, Jonathan's saying on the 5.0, he had the stock gauges would show the AFR. Yeah, it does. It does also, this is the funny thing, it also does it on the Mopars, but somebody is still screwed up with this, and they're not showing the equivalence ratio. And I don't understand why that is, but the actual display is always 6% richer in the Hellcats than it is on the equivalence ratio. It's real weird how that works out. But that's how it is. John's saying, okay, thank you. Ruben's saying, I'd love to race Racer X if he's running a 9.4 also. Oh, yeah, you catch that car in some good air, it will run some 940s. Car is a solid 960 car the way that it sits. I mean, day in and day out. So, I mean, enough so that where he can win events with that thing, especially in bracket racing. Dude can drive, too. Dave's checking in saying, good evening. Can our scat packs be just as aggressive with the tune as the 5-liter? Well, I mean, it can be aggressive in terms of shifting. It can be just as aggressive in terms of, well, a lot of things for that matter. But look, I mean, I'll put it to you like this, and I've told this story 100 times, and I'll keep telling it because it's true. Shalandra, which was my SRT 390, my 2016 SRT 392 Challenger, that car only lost one race to a naturally aspirated Mustang. Naturally aspirated Mustang was on a drag pack. I was on a drag pack. So tire for tire, it was a very good race. And I'm not even going to say that he caught me. Well, no, that one he did catch me on a hole. No, the vet caught me on a hole shot. He beat me outright. That's the only time that it happened at that time. And that's when that car was running 1140s pretty consistently in somewhat decent air. But every single time I was getting reeled in. And although that's fun and it will make some folks make some mistakes along the way, it was a lot of fun to be showing them my ass basically for about 10.75 seconds going down the drag strip. So in that respect, yeah, you can definitely on the drag strip and from a dig on the street, you can give them all hell. In fact, they will all be trying to catch you for the most part, tire for tire. But on the street, from a roll, it's a little bit different story. And because of gear ratios in the 10-speed being what they are, and the natural tendency of that 5-liter to want to rev to the freaking stars, you're not going to have any advantage once you get past your fourth gear. At that point, you are now sitting square in the middle of that Mustang's wheelhouse, and it will absolutely start to slice, dice, and julienne y'all ass on its way around you. That's just the way that it is, again, gearing being what it is in those cars. But you can give them fits, and on the street, they are very evenly matched, again, up to speeds that will get you sent straight to jail. So, drag strip, it's a driver's race, but the Mustang's going to be reeling you in. It just depends on how much real estate you got left until the lights start blinking. But from a roll, well, it's going to be tough. That's just the way it is. There's two completely different ways of going about having fun. Scat Pack is out ahead in front early with the Mustang reeling it in on the big end. They're both a blast to drive, and if you can have one of each, you're doing pretty good. Scavenger, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Saying, had to show my support. It has nothing to do with you saying you did a 180 on the 1320s. Maybe I'll catch you later at Lone Star Mopar Fest later this year, unless you're coming to the showdown. It's going to depend on how my schedule looks, because, man, my schedule is nuts. But I appreciate the support. And yeah, no, listen, man. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say I did a 180 on those cars. It was just so much freaking fun, dude. I mean, look, listen, on the street, and this is where I want to make something real clear. I do all of my work on the drag strip, and yes, I'll go to Mexico on occasion for data logging, which you kind of have to do on occasion, right? But the reality is that if I'm out having fun on the street, I can't have that level of giddy, goofy fun in the Mistress. It's never going to hook. It's always going to go from 0 to 140 way faster than it should. And there was never any, which in essence is to say that I'm going through tires, I'm traction limited no matter what. All of the worry and all of the fear and all of the anxiety and all of the whatever else would come with it goes away with a 1320. They're so eager and so happy, and they just want to play. They're like having a 1.5-year-old Labrador. They just literally, they're just big enough to wrestle and just big enough to make a mess and just big enough to wreck everything. And they're so much fun, and you just can't help but fall in love with them. And that's what the 1320 is to me. It's just this fun ass car. It doesn't matter what the number is that it runs at the drag strip, even though they will run like at Moparmageddon, where Ray's two 1320s were both going 1140s in as delivered form. The car, this is with the Nexans on the front and the back, the passenger seat removed to mimic the weight of the one-seat cars. Other than that, as delivered, running on gasoline, things ran 1140 with an O, 4.0. The things were screaming. I don't know if that sets a record, but in my mind, it did set a record. It set a record for, could not have been happier for, just the smiles per pass. I mean, they were having a riot. Damn thing pulls like a freight train. They're just so much fun. So, like I said, man, at first I was skeptical only because I was coming from a kind of a place of ignorance, especially when it comes to the new operating system that those cars are running off of. They're already faster anyway, but fit that in with the suspension and just everything about that car. I don't know. I just really like that car a lot now. Let's see. But thank you very much, Scavenger. I appreciate the support, man. That's super cool. I love that it's 1322, brother, man. Thank you so much. Dave is asking, let me phrase it, the newer speeds. Oh, yeah, sorry. I think I got to that one. Cool, brother. And again, thank you, Scavenger. Mark's saying, Professor Mason, last time I talked to you, I drove a 2011 Honda Accord. As of January 16th, I now own a 2020 Challenger RT in Frostbite Blue. I love it. One of my favorite colors. I'm officially in the Mopar family. Well, congratulations. Happy to have you, man. You're going to have a lot of fun with that car. It's a real pretty car, too. Love the color. Kurt Tank saying, I have a 68 F100 with a 392 barrel. Is it true that Chevron gas works better on carburation? Haven't heard that. I've been running Exxon in Sierra and no issues and no complaints there. But if you are running a 68 F100 with a 390, I would check. I don't think that your valve seats are hardened, although they probably are heat treated. And you may want to look into running a lead substitute in that thing. But aside from that, just make sure you're running premium gasoline in that thing at all times. And Sovereign saying 392 seemed like the sweet spot. So guys, I've been saying this over and over again. In fact, I put a video out saying that in my opinion, the 392 is probably the best and most important in some ways engine that Chrysler's put out in the last 15 years. That the 392 for a lot of folks is more influential than the 426 Hemi was, even though it took that legendary Hemi, if you want to put that in air quotes, to get us where we are today, not remembering the fact that the 392 had as much, if not more, you can make an argument at least as much, and some would say even more of a racing pedigree than the 426 did. So, and the problem is the 426 so far and away overshadowed anything for its era that the 392 did kind of get just forgotten about. But Big Daddy Don Garlits wouldn't have existed without that supercharged nitro breathing 392. So there's that. But anyway, getting to the point, the 392 really is the sweet spot because you can put that car on a drag radial, especially a drag pack, something like these ET Street Rs or an equivalent on the street that's not legal. You can basically flat foot the thing. You can run 0 to 60s and, the low 3s on the street with those cars. I used to go out and I used to snipe after Hellcats from a dig because they couldn't hook. I would walk all over them basically. That is until they, kind of got themselves sorted out. But by then, in my head, the race was already over, right? Now, if somebody tried to do that, it wouldn't play at all. But that's then and this is now. And the fact of the matter is I had and have had a lot more fun on the street with a 392 than I've ever had with one of the Hellcat variants. And the reason why I say that is because by the time the Hellcats even get to as mild of a level as Little Miss Revlon behind me, they're already in you go to jail now kind of fast. And I put it like this, I can't even load test. Look at that girl, just all, I love it. I can't even load test this girl without hitting speeds that are going to basically render my driver's license useless. So when you're playing around with the 392 cars, and this is where, guys say, oh, from a roll, the Mustang is all this or that. It's only by comparison that the Scat Pack or the 392 car falls short. And that's from a roll, from a dig, and from just driving the thing around, and just from a throttle response, and just from a goofing off point of view. I'm here to tell you that the Dodge has the Mustang beat hands down. That's just the way that they respond. It's just better. Now, of course, you get it from a roll, and there are some areas where the Mustang does a lot better. But where the awesomeness of the Dodge comes into play is that you have all this partial throttle, this tip-in throttle response that the Mustang, when I drove it, it just didn't really have that. So when you couple the fact that you've got this big, cool-ass muscle car, not a sports car, but a muscle car, with this big-ass engine that has got a lot of tip-in torque and wants to try to launch every single time you drive it, and will boil the tires. It will boil those things straight to the rim for as long as you've got your foot in it. What's not to love? The point of it is, and here's another thing, a lot of guys fall into the trap of looking at the numbers. Like, what does it do 0 to 60? What does it do 0 to 100? What does it do, 60 to 130? Those are all important numbers, but they don't translate into a driving experience, at least not from a subjective point of view. You can infer a lot of things from an objective data set. But when you start to actually, I don't know, get behind the wheel of these things, that's when the difference really starts to show. And so the comparisons are really hard. And again, I'll refer back to Racer X's video where he was comparing his Mustang to the Scat Pack and the Camaro in terms of, you know, the 60 to 130 times. Well, I get that that's an important stat for a lot of folks, myself included, but it doesn't translate into the stoplight to stoplight, playing around, goofing off, back road, just cruising and everything else that has to do with the lifestyle that you're basically in once you start, you know, looking at Mustangs or Scat Packs or Camaros. I guess the long story short here is that all of that objective data doesn't translate into a subjective driving experience. More importantly, it doesn't translate into better or worse, because let's not forget, almighty dollar dictates that the Scat Pack is a very strong competitor to the Mustang. The market is showing that over and over and over again. They're selling plenty of these things, and for very, very good reasons. Sovereign saying, love the Challenger, thanks. The front end is what sells me. Yep, that super low end torque. Oh, Sovereign saying, Racer X loves Mrs. X392. Yeah, so at Mopar Armageddon, this is what's funny. So Racer X drove Mrs. X's car and went an 1157, and then I drove Mrs. X's car and I went an 1157. We literally ran the exact same time down to the number in that car. That's a good running car. Kurt's saying I'll try the red line the red line lead substitute. Might be a good idea for those valve seats. I got to do that in Sierra too. Someone saying that was a good video by Racer X. Yeah, it was. Someone saying 392 will spank the 5.0 from a stop. As long as it's got a tire on it, it will. Funny saying, Funny Dwarf, I love it. Say, I love the chat sessions. I've gained a plethora of knowledge from you, and I greatly appreciate it. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate y'all hanging out. And guys, with that, I just noticed we are coming up on 2 hours, so I got to bounce because I got to wake up early. Want to thank each and every one of you guys for hanging out with me. Love each and every one of y'all and could not do this without you. Guys, we're going to send it, don't bend it, keep it shiny side up, don't do anything stupid, in other words, and keep wearing those masks, if not for yourself, then for others. Thank you all very much for hanging out with me. I cannot wait to see y'all on the next one. And with that, that is a wrap. Adios.